everyone, and welcome to this webinar on data privacy, security measures, and third-party service provider management in order to meet the NYDFS compliance requirements. I'm Alan Calder. I'm your host for the next 45 minutes on this webinar. You will, some of you have been on this webinar before, you'll know that you're all on mute, and it'll stay like that through until the back end of the session. We're scheduled to run until 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and there should be a period of maybe 5 to 15 minutes at the end of the webinar where you can ask any questions that you want to in relation to today's subject, or indeed to any other related matter. If you find you've got a question that you want to ask, please use the question tab in the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. You can simply type a question there at any time. That should mean the question is available to me. And once we get through the outbound part of this webinar, what I'll do is I'll go to the questions, and I'll pick up each of the questions in order, and I'll share the question with the audience and then share the answer. So the subject today, as you know, I'm Alan Calder. My background in data security is some 15 or 20 years. I wrote a book about information security called IT Governance, which was published in the very early 2000s. It's now made it all the way through to its 6th edition. It's become a postgraduate university textbook in a number of universities, and really led to the creation of IT Governance, which has now become a pan-European and increasingly global business with operations in the United States, as well as across UK, Ireland, France, Germany, Holland, and then into Asia Pacific and so on. We started off in and around information security, but increasingly as information security or cybersecurity has become driven by compliance rather than just risk management, of course, the whole range of legal aspects to cybersecurity have become a fundamental part of what we as a business are dealing with. And with NYDFS in particular, which is applying itself to financial sector businesses in New York, the extension of the international standard for information security, ISO/IEC 27001, is a logical step for organizations. ISO 27001 is a well-established best practice standard against which external audits can take place. And we've been involved with ISO 27001 since the late 1990s. The company I was of which I was chief executive back then, was the first company to achieve accredited certification to the forerunner for what is now become ISO 27001. So we have literally from the very outset of the standard been involved in certification and helping organizations develop management systems which meet that international standard. And we have a very pragmatic and practical approach, which means that we focus on what organizations need and how to help organizations achieve as cost effectively and in a way that is as business focused as possible cybersecurity practices and management systems which bring all the benefits of cyber certification and compliance without any of the disbenefits of over-bureaucratic activity. We've helped now probably 500 organizations become certified to ISO 27001, and we work with thousands and thousands of companies across cybersecurity, compliance, data protection, compliance, penetration testing, and so on, all across the world. We're going to be talking today about multi-factor authentication and two-factor verification, user verification. We're going to be talking about data retention limits and the disposal of non-public information, the encryption of non-public information, and then managing third-party service providers in order to secure non-public information. As you know, NYDFS is really about securing non-public information, making sure that it's not going to be accessible by those not authorized to see it, that it's going to be appropriately protected, and that's obviously what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about it in the time period where we're only 11 days away from the end of the first 180-day period for compliance with the first set of NYDFS requirements. August 28, 2017, 11 days away, is the date by when organizations that are breached have to report breaches to the NYDFS through the NYDFS website. The online portal, and there's a link on this slide to the new online portal, offers an online option to report breaches. Before you ask, the slides will be going out to everybody who's on the webinar. They'll be going out in the course of the next 3 or 4 days, so you'll be able to get access to the links and use them yourself. But the first reporting deadline, the 180-day reporting deadline, is up in just 11 days, and there's just about 7 months left to the second reporting deadline, which is the first certification, which has to be submitted by covered entities under 23 NY CRR 500.17. So the clock is ticking, as we say in relation to most compliance requirements. The window for compliance is closing every day, and that's absolutely true of the window to reporting breaches. And, you know, reporting breaches is a big issue. Yeah, there's now some, I think, 48 states across the US which have implemented data breach reporting laws. The reality is that data breach reporting hasn't necessarily improved cybersecurity. It's improved the extent to which breaches are reported, but cybersecurity improvement is going to take a number of other things, and NYDFS really does focus in on the types of activity which are necessary to ensure a comprehensive cybersecurity posture for the organization. So as you remember, the timelines for compliance, the first 180 days are cybersecurity program in place, cybersecurity policy in place, access privileges sorted, cybersecurity personnel and intelligence sorted, and incident response plan. And that's why the ability to report is so critical. The incident response plan is only meaningful if it works, and you only know it works if you're able to actually report. A number of other components coming through. Key areas to be focusing on. We'll be talking about a number of those, because while there is some time left before you have to be able to report, nevertheless the requirements are going to take time to put in place, and so the sooner you actually get started, the better. Just a reminder that penalties follow. Under the financial services law, the superintendent has the authority to issue both civil penalties and to impose fines for non-compliance with the regulations, and of course for false reporting. The superintendent this year, remember, fined Deutsche Bank $425 million for violating anti-money laundering laws and failing to take adequate precautions to deal with compliance issues, including having inaccurate and insufficient documentation, poor quality, weak risk assessment, and under-resourced staff. And frankly, from talking to clients in New York, this is not an uncommon situation where cybersecurity is concerned. The extent to which organizations see cybersecurity breaches and fines simply as a cost of doing business is driving increasingly larger fines, and will bring relatively minor. And you need your own due diligence processes to evaluate the adequacy of their cybersecurity practices. And those due diligence could be you carrying out internal audits and testing, could be you hiring a third-party company which has got audit and security testing capabilities to do that kind of work for you. But you need to be able to evidence that you've done the testing, that where you've identified necessity for remediation, the third party has carried out the remediation and has put itself in a place to continue to be secure. So the guidelines for third parties should include the extension of multi-factor authentication, the extension of encryption as required to cover data in transit and at rest, what the covered entity has to do if there is a cybersecurity event, who they have to report it to, how they have to do it, how quickly they have to do it. Typically, You'll want to know from any service provider that is holding your data if they've been breached. You'll want them reporting it to you in a particular format within a particular time frame. You'll also want a set of representations to be made and warranties to be given about the quality of their policies and procedures and the extent to which they're properly implemented to ensure that the covered entities own information systems and non-public information processing is secure, and all of that contained in a legal binding contract with significant indemnities built into it, so that if there is a breach, you've got something that you can very quickly rely on in relation to your third-party service provider. In February 2016, Toys R Us, the toy retailer, now with very substantial online activities, encouraged members of its Rewards R Us program to reset their passwords following what they described as unauthorized attempts to access member accounts. According to databreaches.net, a Toys R Us spokesman said this appears to be related to earlier online breaches of websites not associated with Toys R Us or any of our vendors or programs. In other words, they were concerned that the breaches of third-party website might have enabled attackers either to make progress into Toys R Us websites or would have given them access to passwords which people then used on the toy retailer, and so because of the repetition of the password will make it easy to get in. There were actually, in March 2015, there had been several attempts to hack Rewards R Us customer accounts, and the Toys R Us, who like to think of themselves as being well on top of cybersecurity, sent out a notification to customers saying they believed that these attacks were because of large breaches at other companies where user login names and passwords had been stolen and then used to try and make unauthorized access to other accounts such as those at Rewards R Us. So Rewards R Us, trying to ensure that it protects its customers from the consequences of using easy to crack passwords on multiple websites, all of that best addressed through rolling out multi-factor authentication. So your information security agreements, we've touched on the need to have that with service providers. In fact, you should be thinking about all of your suppliers that have access to confidential information or to your information systems who might present a risk to the organization's information assets. It's critical to ensure that information security is properly and comprehensively addressed in agreements with third-party suppliers, including measures for redress and for the distribution of culpability under all of the range of circumstances that you can imagine. As Target, the favorite of everybody in the cybersecurity industry to point at what can happen when organizations don't pay proper attention to cybersecurity, is Target discovered to its detriment the security perimeter, the area within which an organization is accountable for protecting its data, doesn't end at the perimeter of the organization itself, doesn't end at its own endpoints, ends at the endpoints of the organizations who can contact or access its systems. Target, if you remember, was breached because one of its HVAC suppliers that had access to its business management system was itself compromised, as a result of which malware was uploaded into the Target system. So your information security management system scope for data protection and NYDFS compliance stretches much more widely than your own direct scope. You need to think about the hinterland organizations that might expose you. And you should be thinking about that in the context of a risk assessment. So your security posture should be driven by your risk assessment, should be driven by some form of risk rating, some form of being able to identify the seriousness of a risk. So an organization which relies on single passwords and usernames, you would see as being a high-risk supplier. An organization which has already deployed multi-factor authentication, you would think of as, in that context anyway, being a lower risk supplier. So some method of ranking risk, some method of ranking suppliers, a contingency plan to deploy where there is a cyber event so that you can close it down, you can deal with it very quickly, you know you've got a timeline within which you have to report a breach, an exit strategy with the vendor that enables you to cease dealing with them within a very tight given time frame if they're breached. So the vendor knows that they're not just potential penalties, but they are able to lose the contract if their security is inadequate, all set out in a binding contract that you're able to effectively enforce. And ISO 27001 deals also with supplier relationships. Control category A15, which has 2 objectives, contains 5 controls, 5 best practice controls you can deploy to help you achieve the objectives set out in those clauses of the New York law. The first objective is that there should be information security and supplier relationships, and all of the organization's assets that are accessible by suppliers should be protected. There are 2 controls that help achieve that objective. The first is that there should be an information security policy which covers supplier relationships, sets out in detail what you do, how you do it, what the objectives of the policy are, and then the second control addresses security within supplier agreements and sets out how you ensure third-party contracts match not just regulatory and legislative requirements, but also have appropriate responsibilities and consequences set out between the organizations. The third control deals with the information and communication technology supply chain and how you contract down through it. The second control objective is around information service delivery management, maintaining agreed level of information security in line with supplier agreements. And of course, that's very much about monitoring and reviewing supplier services, monitoring what your third-party suppliers are giving to you, making sure that service performance audits and so on are all carried out appropriately, and managing changes to supplier services. VS Risk, which is a tool that you can acquire through the IT governance website, is a very effective platform for managing risk to non-public information and managing risk through the supply chain. It's a tool which is designed to enable you to create a robust platform against which you can carry out risks and carry out repeated risks. I'd just make a small point, which is that we're aware from Vigilant, the vendor, the developer of this that sells it through IT governance and other websites, that the price of this tool will be increasing significantly to recognize all of the additional functionality which has been deployed in it, and that'll be happening, we believe, by the end of August. So if you want to grab a bargain, you should be thinking about getting hold of VS Risk in the course of August. But as you can see, the risk scenarios in this particular slide include inappropriate or lack of action by third parties due to inadequate monitoring, inappropriate or lack of action by third parties due to inadequate confidentiality agreements. And you can see how those might affect the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of non-public information, and deploy appropriate controls which enable you to bring that to a level with which you're satisfied. VS Risk can also drive, there's an add-on that can drive documentation, including information security policies. All of the policies and documents that ISO 27001 requires can be driven out of the risk assessment tool as part of the data protection documentation. So, for instance, managing third-party service contracts, there's a procedure for how that might happen, get driven out as selecting that as a control. So VS Risk with the documentation toolkit is a very effective and practical and cost-effective mechanism for driving the documentation that you need in the environment that you're having to tackle. It's an easy-to-use solution. It's aligned with ISO 27001. It makes it very straightforward to deliver the consistent, valid, and comparable results that ISO 27001 is looking for. Generates good auditable reports, good evidence of compliance that you need to have to demonstrate that you've protected non-public information in line with your obligations. It's geared for repeatability. It's geared so that you can carry out repeat reviews. If, for instance, you've determined that encryption is not feasible, you can return to that decision. You can update the decision as it becomes feasible. You'll have an audit record of all previous decisions. It's a very robust tool for managing compliance over an extended period of time. And of course, it's streamlined and accurate. It reduces the chance of human error. very substantially, can help business very substantially. So that's the kind of overall picture of VS Risk. You can watch a video of how to deploy the tool and use it in the real environment. It's capable of dealing not just with NIST controls, but also PCI DSS. So it can help you develop, if you have a PCI compliance requirement, an integrated set of controls. So rather than having to do things in silos with all of the expense of doing that, it can give you single controls that meet the requirements of multiple standards. So IT governance can help you meet the requirements of the NYDFS with some confidence. You can download a set of tools that are tailored to the requirements of the regulation. Products from which you can choose include certified online training, ISMS online training, which includes the links between ISO 27001 and NYDFS, the Cybersecurity Documentation Toolkit, which has got all of the elements that you need, VS Risk Assessment software, which you can deploy on a standalone or on a multi-user basis, currently all on the desktop. So developed by expert practitioners, not theorists, cost-effective and efficient, used in substantial numbers of organizations around the world. The live online training courses are particularly relevant. The upcoming information security, cybersecurity courses as a foundation course only coming up in October. That's taking place on the 24th, followed by a 3-day implementer course in October as well, and then that repeated in November and in December. It's a 1-day foundation course and then a 3-day implementer course that leads to the internationally accredited foundation and lead implementer courses accredited to ISO 17024, which is the standard required by the federal government and many others as being the appropriate standard for certifying training. Documentation Toolkit, as we've seen, is aligned with NIST SP 853, with the financial services cybersecurity requirements, with the Massachusetts regulation. It helps meet the New York data breach and other data breach requirements across the United States. It's got project tools in it. It's a very practical tool to help organizations meet their various compliance requirements. And there's a lot of free, valuable resources on itgovernance.usa.com, starting with green papers, which talk about how to align regulatory compliance or the legal compliance with ISO 27001, how to do a risk assessment, how to deal with the general data protection regulation, substantial ranges of free, easy to use, practical information. And of course, you can join our LinkedIn group where you can talk to other people who are tackling NYDFS and other cybersecurity requirements in the US. There's the LinkedIn group details. You can apply to join that. So that brings me to the end of what we were planning to cover in the course of this webinar. I've probably talked for a little bit longer than I should have, but if you still have any questions, this is the practical time at which to put them in. I'm just looking at time and realizing that we have actually gone over time. So what we're going to have to do is, if you have any questions, please do post them into the window and we will share questions and answers if there are any, but certainly we'll be sending out copies of the slides to everybody who's been on the webinar. As we're now past 1 p.m., as we're now past 2 p.m. Eastern Standard, I'd just like to say thank you to all of you who've joined us today. I hope the webinar has been useful. If there is anything we can do, please do get on to itgovernance.usa.com or call us. There's a global number on our website, and we'll do whatever we can to help you with NYDFS compliance requirements, or indeed anything else to do with cybersecurity. Thank you all for being with us, and I hope you have a very good Thursday. Bye-bye.